Looking forward to the next presentation is going to be by Jim Peters. Jim Peters is the, what I always say, and I don't know if it's accurate, but he's the guru of nighttime economy issues, meaning essentially what many people refer to as entertainment districts. I guess that's the not preferred term, but it's what most people usually talk about as it relates to bars and restaurants. And as you know, bars and restaurants pose different challenges for different cities. And what's happened is Jim, over the last 3 decades, has essentially developed so much expertise that he's got a systematic approach based upon principles that we're going to hear about this morning that, if followed, actually produce great results. And this is a big issue I know in my community, and I know it's a big issue in other folks' communities. So without further ado, Jim.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here today, and actually this has been a wonderful learning experience for me as well. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. One of the things I observed was that many of the presentations today, over the past couple of days, really featured a lot of images of streets and streetscapes and buildings and tables outside and all this other really fine design work. But what I also noticed is that it's all daytime. The images are all pictures of the daytime. And if there are any people in the pictures, they're very minimal in comparison to the structures. And I think this is where I come in a lot of cases with cities, because I'm called in when you have 15, 20,000 people exiting bars at the same time on sidewalks that you designed for kind of a daytime use that are now being overwhelmed with people who in many cases are impaired or intoxicated and choose to use the side streets and alleyways and doorways as urinals or other uses, and also the increasing calls for service from fights and increasingly shootings and stabbing. So that's where I come in, is kind of the person who works to try to fix some of these problems that are not as kind of pretty as the pictures of the daytime, but really are a reality of a lot of cities that have been successful in revitalizing their downtowns. And a number of years ago, I took a course about the Western mind. And the professor was from Stanford. I live in Santa Cruz, California. Just a quick background. I grew up in Levittown. Some of you may have heard. And so I was a product of the suburban experiment known as Levittown. And later got into the food service industry, first by selling hot dogs at a hot dog stand, and eventually opening up a restaurant in Pittsburgh and working in D.C. in some fine restaurants before going back to school. But also in that time period, I went to the International School of Mixology in Manhattan to become a mixologist, which is pretty trendy today. So if my work doesn't pan out over the next couple of years with the current renaissance of cocktails, I certainly have another career that I could pursue because I've already been trained to do it. But my background then really covered the gauntlet of managing a disco in 1972. Some of you are old enough to remember 1972 and disco. So I was there on Long Island in a disco. We were the first club on Long Island that charged a cover for a DJ. Up until that time, you only charged a cover for live entertainment. So I have a background. We had an 800 occupancy venue, so Friday, Saturday night, we had to deal with 800 people. I went back and got my degree in hotel restaurant administration, and then continued on to get a counseling degree. I like to pursue that. And so I counseled people arrested for drunk driving when I was going to school. And that's how I kind of correlated my work as a bartender and a person counseling people arrested for drunk driving, and saw there was some little bit of a correlation between the two. So in the early 80s, I became an advocate for trying to promote the idea of training people who work in bars and restaurants about their responsibility in serving alcohol, and essentially help to create an international standard or movement around what we call responsible beverage service, and was part of the early stages of defining standards. I wrote the first legislation that would set up a statewide system of training that became a template for Oregon, the first state in the United States that has that, and then traveled to New Zealand and helped them to establish their host responsibility program, Australia with their patron care program. So during that first decade, that was really a lot of our work. And the reason I moved from Massachusetts, where I was living, to California was because we were involved in an evaluation of how effective these types of programs were. That's when we began to do some community coalition building and organizing community groups, and that was the second decade of our work. And then we had a project in San Diego when they were trying to set up a business improvement district in the Pacific Beach area. And because of a lot of the challenges with the nightlife, they weren't able to get the daytime retailers to support a bid. So the city council member invited us in to help work on that. And that's how I got more actively involved in a district management approach and became involved with the International Downtown Association, the National Main Street Center, attended their conference, and eventually became a regular speaker. And we're a nonprofit, so our board members have included the International Downtown Association president going back, I think, 3 or 4 presidents ago. So we've had a strong kind of working relationship with that whole downtown development. That has been principally our primary contractors in the beginning. Contracts were with bids or Main Street programs, but more recently with city government. So as an example, just last year we worked in the Fremont area of downtown Las Vegas, Minneapolis, and Columbia, Missouri. And next month we'll be starting in Orlando and Fort Lauderdale. But collectively, we've worked with over 60 US and Canadian cities, helping them to figure out how best to approach managing their nighttime economy. Now I mentioned the Western Mind class that I took, and the professor was from Stanford, and he kind of showed us through art the difference between the Eastern mind and the Western mind. And so if you look at Western art, a lot of times what you see is the focus is on the buildings and the bridges, and the people are often a very minimalist, are often a minimal part or the predominant part of the painting. So it's always the pictures of the portraits and the people. I'm confusing this, but the idea is that the Western art was always all about how people have dominated nature. It's how we control nature and structure things. Whereas Eastern art, if you ever noticed, it's all about nature and how people kind of blend into nature. And so our work is about how people blend into the structures that you all are planning and creating. And so the Sociable City, this idea of sociability as an economic engine, is something that we're trying to reframe some of the challenges that cities face. And if you stop and think about it, part of the reason you're here, besides these stimulating presentations, is the opportunity to meet and socialize with peers that either you meet or that you come with. And when we think about a restaurant or a bar or a cafe or a nightclub or a coffee shop or a tea shop, a craft brew house, whatever it is, the primary purpose of us going there is less about the product that we're purchasing and more the opportunity to socialize with other people. And when we start to think about it then, and we start looking at some of the licensing issues, then we have to start to think about what is it that we're really selling and what is it that we're really enabling a person to do. So our country is based around, as it relates to these venues, alcohol licensing. And most alcohol licensing laws were created at the end of Prohibition. And so there were 2 different systems established in the country, but essentially they came up with some standards that were applicable in 1933. So you have a restaurant license or a bar license or a tavern license. And so these standards defined the nature of a business according to the time. But now what's happening is cities are challenged in trying to fit one standard into the lifestyles and the time frame in which people live today. And that's where you start to see some conflict. So I'm going to go over how these challenges of people management and building the structures that people can socialize in and adapting to the kind of antiquated systems. And that's what I learned about form-based design. In the new urbanism is trying to say, let's look at a new way in which to standardize or to come up with a standard that's more appropriate to the times. And let's give up all of these thick books of regulations that are no longer as applicable to what we want to try to achieve. So in a way, your technology, and that's what I'm thinking about, may be a transference to how we license and regulate what I call social venues. So rather than saying a bar, restaurant, nightclub, music venue, I say a social venue, because that's really the purpose of why people are going out. So when we look at the sociable city, it's that sociability drives development. And as more people seek an urban lifestyle, there is increased demand for places to eat, drink, listen to music, and dance. And more people can bring more vibrancy, but can also place burdens on public safety resources. And it was interesting, about 75% of people shop after 5. And in a lot of cases, it's very difficult in many of the cities we work in to keep retail businesses open after 5. But the meatpacking district in Manhattan is a really good example of the adaptability of this, because the meatpacking district, when it first began, was where they cut up meat. There were train loads of meat that came, and they butchered the meat on the street. And then that's where the food channel is broadcast from. So you have this kind of movement of restaurants coming into that area with these new chefs, that it became a destination for fine restaurants and then eventually nightclubs. So you could be going into that district at night and see carcasses of beef hanging up while you're going out to dance in a nightclub. I mean, that was the evolutionary stage. But you had all of these people that were coming to the nightlife. If any of you ever watched Sex and the City, remember they went to look for the sailors? They were down by the meatpacking district. But the idea was how do we tap into this market? So that's when you started to see some high-end fashion stores starting to be located there, because the people who were going out were the people who were buying clothes to go out. So why not put the stores where the people were going? But they didn't want to shop and take the clothes with them, but they wanted to shop before they went out, so the stores would deliver the clothes to you after you bought them. So you can see how this evolution of mixing kind of a older industrial use into a sociability use, which then drives a retail, and then that retail drives residential. And that's really the big problem in the meatpacking district now, is that it was originally designed not to have residential. But because it's become so popular, the area has grown with residential, and now they don't want all the late night noise and the disturbances that come from a vibrant nightlife. So this is kind of the evolutionary phases. So using that Eastern philosophy, there was once this very wealthy man, and he went to visit his friend. His friend just built a new house. And so he went up and looked around the house, and then they got to the top floor, and there's a balcony, and he could look out over the countryside, and he could see the city in the background, and he thought, this is what I want. So he goes back to his hometown, and he looks for a contractor. Coincidentally, he finds the contractor who built his friend's house. He said, I want a house just like my friend. So the contractor is building the foundation. The man comes up and says, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm building a foundation. I don't want a foundation. And so the contractor said, yeah, but I need the foundation to put in the first floor. He said, I don't want a first floor. And so the contractor is getting confused. Yeah, but I have to do that for the second floor. No, I just want the third floor. So what happens sometimes is somebody goes to another city and they see something and say, I want that. And they come back to their own city and say, let's do it. But they don't understand that you have to build that foundation. You have to build that first floor. You have to build that second floor. I work with college students all the time because we use interns. And it's the same thing, you know, people want to develop the new app and become the next. I live near Silicon Valley, so I speak in technology terms, but the idea is that they want to be that person. But they don't understand that in a sense, your life goes through those stages as well. First, you have to build a foundation, which is your family and the values that you have. You have to have an education, so then you have to learn and study. Then you have to get your first jobs, and then you have to get experience and gain some credibility, and then eventually you could get to that third floor. And so I think from a city planning, urban planning, design point of view, we have to start to think about how this all relates to creating a sociable city. So a community's opportunity for socializing is among the most influential factors in determining where people choose to live. And this was a study that was done by the Knight Foundation, Soul of the Community Project, where they surveyed 43,000 people in 26 cities. Or for the reverse, I'm not good with numbers. I know a lot of you are good with numbers, but it escapes me. But this is really one of the three factors. The other is public space, you know, the green space, and diversity. Those are the three top reasons. But socializing, particularly at night, is one of the more common reasons people choose to live where they live. And when you stop and think about the whole rise of the creative class, the Richard Florida book, he even points out in his book, it's the cities that have that bohemian culture, that culture of coffee shops and nightlife places, that really facilitates that creative class. And if you think about the cities with the high technology industry bases, Austin, San Francisco, Seattle, DC, Boston, what do they have that other cities don't have that attract that technology worker is a very vibrant music, social economy. And so this is all part of what we're here to talk about. So the vision, that third floor that a lot of people have when we ask them, what is a sociable city? People on the street, it's walkable, eat and drink outside, mix of ages, cultures, variety of things to do, spontaneous informal activities, open at different times, varying price points. But it's the street activity that adds to the vibrancy of a downtown. Now, when I've been in the hospitality industry, obviously, and for me, hospitality is the art and science of creating places for people to socialize. I got the greatest charge when I saw people come together and meet each other and form relationships and see people who meet for the first time come back and celebrate an engagement and then come back for their wedding and then come back for their divorce party. So, you know, it's that sequence of relationships that people go through that really made me feel comfortable. So the other thing about an urban hospitality experience versus a suburban hospitality experience is that in a suburban hospitality experience, we call our friends up. We all agree to go to Chili's at the mall. We drive, there's plenty of parking, there's no residents, we don't disturb anybody. We go in, we drink, we eat, we talk, we have fun, and then we leave and we get our cars and we go. An urban hospitality experience is that when you get off of work, you meet your friends for a drink, and then all of a sudden, you meet somebody you haven't seen in years, and they're going out to this new restaurant that you hadn't gone to. So then you say, well, I'll go to dinner with you. Now that, when you go walking down the street, you run into somebody who says there's a band playing at a club that you really like, but you didn't know they were in town. So after dinner, you go meet up with those friends, and then you go hang out in a bar afterwards and talk about the night. So it's that spontaneity, the kind of the randomness that happens in an urban hospitality zone that you don't get in a suburban experience. Coordination of a lot of different activities in that district than just building a Chili's in the middle of a shopping mall, you know? And so there's a lot of details that come in the urban environment that doesn't necessarily happen in the suburban environment. So we look at the cycles of sociability. First, you need people, because people socialize. And it's the connection, it's the relationship building. And in a lot of ways, it's the development of affinity groups. And somebody talked about the X factor, this previous speaker. And that's where you begin to form a relationship, not just with the group of people that you're with, but with a particular venue, a particular establishment. You know, you go back to the same place because you develop a relationship with that venue. So it's the people that brings vibrancy. And the more people you have, sometimes the more vibrant it is. But sometimes if there are too many people, or you have people engaging in activities, then it becomes a safety risk, or it begins to interfere with the quality of life. Now, in our tour, and Andre is talking about kind of the organic nature of New Orleans and its lack of codes and inspectors. Well, I spent the other day with a group of people, because we did an assessment here in New Orleans about 5 years ago, and they're just very upset about the lack of enforcement and all of the issues that are happening, and the crime and the noise disturbances, and people are leaving and they're moving and their property values are going down. Maybe on the street, urban street, the property values are going up, but some of the surrounding areas, the residential population is going down, and a lot of it is because there isn't enforcement, because they aren't adhering to codes and standards. So I think that this really becomes a cycle that we have to begin to look at more closely. So when we look at 21st century planning, as it relates to socializing, there has to be a coordinated approach where people can set community standards, where you update your zoning codes proportionate to the stage of the cycle of the district and the nighttime activity, and build an efficient late night transportation system, like I said yesterday, that allows for the density of social experiences with minimal impact on quality of life from sound, litter, trash, and assaults and robberies and other types of negative consequences of an active nighttime economy. Now, when we look at vibrancy in the urban district, hospitality zone as we call it, really begins with the street. And the street really creates the animation by how you integrate various features or factors. And sometimes what might be very good for a daytime experience with landscaping and trees and bushes and all of that other stuff can actually interfere with the nighttime. We talked about women using parking garages. The same thing is true if you have really nice landscaping with bushes and you have to walk from one end to the other. A lot of women will hesitate if there are a lot of bushes because there's that sense of fear. We talk about, the sidewalk and the bricks. You go out like I do at 2 o'clock in the morning at closing time, where you have hundreds of women in stiletto heels, impaired by alcohol, trying to navigate through a brick sidewalk, and the potential risks that are associated with that. So some things that may be appropriately for the design of a daytime economy may actually create risks that you have to anticipate for the nighttime economy. In England, what they do is they have these street pastors who hand out flip-flops to women who are in stilettos heels, because otherwise they often take their shoes off and there could be broken glass. There's a lot of foot injuries in nightlife districts where women take off their shoes and there's glass on the sidewalk. So you have to start to plan and anticipate some of this. And so you want to work towards creating the street as a venue, but also you want to facilitate that early evening, late night entertainment, and also to create one of the most important local economies. When you think about a local economy, it's how much of a dollar that's spent is recirculated within the local community. And when you look at a Walmart, for instance, it's not very much. A lot of it is circulated out of the community. You look at a local restaurant, and that money gets circulated over and over and over again through the economy. So you have to start thinking about that sociability and economic engine in ways that you may not have before. And then finally, you have this 21st century safety. We just did a conference in Charleston. It's great that you talk about Charleston because it's a model city for us. We've worked closely with the Chief of Police, Greg Mullen, over the past decade. He came to our event in San Francisco and went back with the same ideas that we're talking about here and really changed his policing model. Because when you get an active nightlife district with a lot of issues around perceived safety or real safety, often the city's response is, we just need more police. So they send out a lot of police. And policing cannot fix a bad planning decision. So Minneapolis, for instance, they have the warehouse district, which has for decades been the center of social activity. It's going through a transition, and they put light rail in, and whoever designed the light rail decided to put the stop right in front of two high occupancy venues, so that at closing time you have about 500 people who empty out into a sidewalk as narrow as this table, and this is where the light rail tracks are. And there's no barrier between the light rail tracks and this. So now they want the police to manage these crowds. Well, you can't, because it was a stupid thing to do. And you can't go back and fix that because it's such a major impediment. But you can develop a better complete community policing model, which is really what we've established over the years as some guidelines, and that was what our event in Charleston was. We now partner with the Major Cities Chiefs Association, which is the association of chiefs of 500,000 or more population. And we had over 50 police departments there. Mostly they're deputy chiefs and commanders of nightlife districts. So it's obviously an important issue for cities like Memphis and Atlanta and DC and Seattle and San Francisco, as well as smaller cities like Columbia, South Carolina, or Greensboro, North Carolina. So effective public safety really has to begin at the licensing stage. And then it has to be with the education of the operator, and then it has to be with ongoing monitoring and compliance. But in addition, the venues have to be held to a higher standard of how they're going to operate their business. And so it's this continuum of safety that you have to work with. So we look at a hospitality zone as really this kind of mixed-use area that has a density of dining and entertainment venues that often can serve as a center for festivals and events and other types of activities. And one of the things we've seen is that as cities are trying to revitalize their downtowns, they'll often use an event or like a wine walk or whatever you call it. Different kinds of sidewalk sales or different types of things. Thursday night or Friday night, first Thursday, art showcases as a way to generate people's interest in downtown. But then as you start to do more festivals and events and you get the profit motive into the event planning stage, like in Columbia, Missouri, one of the comments somebody made is we have festival fatigue, that the festivals are so frequent that they're no longer generating what they wanted, plus they were successful in building the dining and entertainment experience that it works against or is counterproductive to the restaurants and the bars and the nightclubs that have emerged because you have the festivals. The Gas Lamp District in San Diego is a classic example of how they needed, the Mardi Gras, they needed the whatever the events were to bring people to that area. But now that it's its own destination, it's its own event. Every Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, San Diego is an event. You don't need as many events. So I think you have to start to weigh how you utilize that space. But the social experience is the common underlying attraction. So what factors create a sociable environment? Do they differ for men and women? Do they differ for people of different ages? And what's the community role in facilitating sociability? We heard a lot over the past day and a half about how you as urban planners work to try to facilitate the kind of the retail shopping experience. You have a very sophisticated way in locating and streetscaping and lighting and parking to facilitate that daytime retail shopping experience. But how much attention do you give to the creation of the nighttime social experience? And that's really where you have to go to, because that's what's going to make people want to live in or near your shopping district or your residential community. So just like yesterday's speaker, I find population and demographics really interesting. And he mentioned Ray Oldenburg, who's a friend of mine, and we had him as a speaker. But I learned about this demographic concept when I was, in college, where a professor said, your generation, meaning the boomer generation, will define the future of the economy and social changes for the next decades. And so I always thought about that. And it's true, because we did, but now we're losing. We're losing. Us boomers are falling behind of being the most important segment of our society. It's these millennials that are just creeping up and taking all the attention away from us. So what we looked at, or what I looked at, is I looked at birth rates. And then I projected forward 18 years and 18 and 50 years. So when did people turn 18, which is the turquoise, and when did people turn 50? Now, we don't have a lot of numbers for the early phase for the people turning 50 because birth rates weren't calculated at that same rate. But if you look here, you have the 1970s, and you have this boom of people turning 18. So when did we have the disco movement? Right, the late 1970s, early 80s. Then you saw that drop. I guess I could use this little pointer thing. So then you had the drop in birth rate. So this is kind of where the X generation started to come of age. Now this little number here, you see this spike? Remember in the Northeast the power blackout that we had? If you go back 18 years, then this drops off. So then you started to see people turning 18. So this is the first wave of the millennials coming of age. And then this is the first wave of the boomers turning 50. And look at that time period in which that happened. So you could overlay the economy with this, the recessions, the growth, the dot-com era. Remember the dot-com era in the 1990s, right? Well, this was the period when the millennials were in their tween years, and then they were buying all the computers and all the other things that really helped to drive a lot of the economy. Remember the SUV period, and everybody was against the SUVs? But when I grew up, you had station wagons. So the boomer parents had station wagons to take their kids to the games. The millennials' parents had SUVs to take their kids to the games. So all of these patterns correlate. But this period of time, right in here, is where you started to see the evolution of the densification of cities, the movement away from people living in suburbia. And you had the boomers, kids growing up and leaving the suburbs, and then the Xers and the millennials. So this period of time is where we started to see this kind of growth in urban lifestyle. And that's really important, because I'll get back to that, because people who are young versus people who are old socialize differently. So when we look at life stages, this is a broad generalization. I heard this at an IDA event in Los Angeles, probably around 20 years ago, so I don't remember the person's name, but you have singles, mingles, and jingles. And we later added families, because everybody complained that we didn't include families. So singles are that young, unattached person whose really primary purpose in life is to meet somebody, And that's why at that age, when they're young, they don't have a lot of disposable income, and it's all about showing yourself off to find a mate. It's all kind of birds do it, bees do it, and it's all about that social interaction. So that's why you have a demand for these larger venues with music and dance, with low-cost alcohol, and overcrowding is actually conducive to that personal connection, And so once you start to meet people and develop a relationship, you move into that mingle stage. You've got a couple, or you have a group of friends, and you have this affinity group. You have your first jobs, you're making more money. You could go out and dine in a nicer restaurant. You could sit in a craft beer house and buy, $10 beers, whereas before you looked for, dollar Budweisers. And so you have this evolution of a change in demand for the social space. And then as you have a family, obviously, for those who have families, particularly in the early years, your social life basically goes out the door, unless you go to Chuck E. Cheese or whatever your social interaction becomes. And then as your kids grow, or as you become a tourist, or as you become a business traveler, you are what we call jingles. These are the people who have more disposable income for spending. Now, all of you are eating out 3 times a day when you're on the road. And so that's why you're a jingle, because you have money in your pocket. You would never eat out 3 times a day at home. Perhaps some of you would, but most of you wouldn't. But when you're traveling, that's what you do. So these are the 3 kind of life stages. They all have different demands. Now, what we fail to recognize is that while people want to shop after 5 o'clock at night, particularly to shop until 9 or 10 o'clock at night, or they want to go out to restaurants, and they want to go out to movies or to the theater or to sports games, they all want to have people working in those places to service them. So who typically works in the retail stores, or in the movie theaters collecting your ticket, or in the restaurant serving you? What's the demographic of people who work in those venues? Young people, right? You're high school, college age people, you're young 20-something people. So when does their workday end? My workday ends at 5 or 6. So I go home, I take my shower, my wife and I decide where to go, make reservations at 8, then we go to a movie after. So our lifestyle in terms of socializing is generally about 2 or 3 hours after we clock out from work. If you work in a shopping mall and it closes at 9, you get home at 10, when does your social life technically begin if you go through the same process? Midnight, which is when most people who are young go out. And then they want to stay out for a couple of hours, right? 2 or 3 hours, right? Because they don't have to be to work until 3 o'clock at night in the afternoon. So we older people don't understand why anybody has to be out after 1 o'clock in the morning. So why should we keep bars and restaurants and nightclubs open that late? They should all be home in bed. Or if they're students, they should be home studying. Isn't that the way it was when we were younger? So what happens though, and that was a fine experience when you had a suburban lifestyle. But now with mixed-use development, where you're blending residential into nightlife districts, you now have these generational conflicts. And so I think this is something that we have to begin to plan for and anticipate. And the other is, do women and men want different things when they go out? So we started in Baton Rouge with a survey of 300 students, probably around 20 years ago, and found that women and men, when they go out, want different things. And so we started to compile a list of what women want. Top of the list is always clean, equipped restrooms. Safe, well-lit parking, identifiable staff, crowd control, seated decks of music. So as I did this list over the years, inevitably, this started out as a much shorter list. But women would always come up and say, oh, you forgot something, So then it got longer and longer and longer. So then we said, okay, well, what do men want? Well, men want women, beer, sports, and more beer, Now, the only time a man ever came up to me and said, you forgot something, and that is that not all men are interested in women. So we have to add that little caveat. With issues and the aging of the population, both from the boomers' perspective. If you go back to that chart, the number of people turning 18 on that chart continues through 2023. And so I think we have to recognize that the social experience for young adults begins at 18. And now, because people are postponing marriage, living in urban centers, it can go into 30 or the early 30s. So that's a really peak time. And as that population grows significantly, the demand for more of these social spaces is also going to grow. So you want to begin to put this into the perspective of an economic engine. So New York City in 2004 did an economic study. And what they found was that this is just nightclubs. This is not restaurants, it's not anything, it's just nightclubs. $9.7 billion in sales, 95,500 jobs, $391 million in city tax, $320 million in sales, 65 million admissions. The combined total of admissions to all of New York's sports arenas, all of Broadway shows, all of movie theaters does not equal the number of admissions to nightclubs in New York City. And this was in 2004, and obviously I'm sure things changed. But look at that 908 million pre-nightlife. This is what people reported they spend just getting ready to go out. So it's buying a new dress, it's getting your nails done, it's doing your hair. Obviously we learned that men don't really pay attention to most of that, but it's really, what do people spend money on before they go out? And where do they spend that money? Where do you spend your money? Buying clothes, or getting your hair done, or getting your nails done, or buying shoes, or you know, if you're into food, buying things so you can become a home chef, or if you're into becoming a mixologist, or where do they spend that money and when do they spend it? During the day. So when you think about the nighttime economy, as big as it is in terms of direct spending, it really facilitates a daytime retail economy. Now, going beyond that, San Francisco included the restaurant bar sector. And so you have 4.2 billion in revenue, employing 48,000 people, but they spent 670 million on local food from local suppliers, particularly now with the food to table concept. 580 million on local beverages, and then 370 million on musicians, performers, comedians. You have restaurants, they need pest control companies, they need trash management companies, they have to buy glasses and dishes and silverware. They have to buy all these things, but these things are all bought from local companies. So think about the multiplier effect. So this is really all about the cycles of sociability and beginning to recognize the nighttime economy is really important in the future of urban development. And what we're beginning to see is where there are cities like San Francisco and New York and Edmonton and Austin that have done these economic studies, they begin to realize we need somebody who's going to help coordinate this. So in San Francisco, they had the Entertainment Commission, which is a local licensing authority around entertainment venues. But after the study, they hired a business development manager for nightlife in the Office of Workshop and Economic Development. So there is a staff person in the city of San Francisco whose job it is to develop nightlife. In Pittsburgh, where we worked for a couple of years, they have within the mayor's office a nighttime economy coordinator, and her job is to be the liaison of all the different business districts and all the challenges and being able to better organize and allocate resources. So the South Side, on a Friday and Saturday night, has 15,000 people going to the bars and nightclubs. The city picks up the trash. They don't pick the trash up on Sunday. Now residents are complaining about all the restaurants and bars because of trash overflowing from their dumpsters and overflowing from the sidewalk trash cans that they have. So Allison, now that she has this job, is going to the Public Works Department and is going to work with the authority of the mayor to have pickups on Sunday. You know, a lot of cities, they don't pick up on Saturdays. So then Friday night, people come out into the district and there's trash and litter and everything. So you have to begin to look at your scheduling of all of these city services to match the nighttime economy. So hospitality often needs development, and typically you have the emerging or re-emerging area, and then it moves into developing, then it's mature, then it declines. So each stage of a nightlife district requires a special focus. It requires maybe better assistance where you have an old warehouse district where somebody wants to open up a fine dining restaurant, that you might help them with their permitting and licensing and make accommodations for helping them to get their utilities and everything hooked up. But as that area begins to grow and evolve and there's more restaurants and more clubs, maybe you need to tighten up and have some limits. And then you have to get to a point where you have to say, we can't have any more. And if you don't, then you have too much competition. And too much competition in a district can lead to riskier promotional practices. So when you involve alcohol with risky promotional practices, that's where you start to have more quality of life and public safety challenges. So this is really kind of the stages, and I want to use this as kind of a metaphor. A lot of times your retroactive or adaptive uses. So you have old districts, they've been abandoned for a long time. Somebody wants to open up a restaurant in an old bookstore. Well, everybody's excited, because everybody gets excited about a new restaurant. I mean, I opened up a restaurant in Pittsburgh, and I was like a local celebrity, you know? I mean, it's just everybody gets excited about it. So if you think about a bookstore, that might be a good-sized bookstore. They might have 10 customers at any one time, a couple of staff people. And if you had 10 bookstores on your block, back in the days, you might have 100 people in that area, just in the bookstores. Now, somebody wants to convert that to more of a fine dining restaurant with some limited seating, so you might have an occupancy of 150. And then maybe you need 10 staff at any one time, or 5 staff and 5 staff during rotating shifts. And then multiply that and say, oh, well, one restaurant's successful, we might as well have 10. So now you've got 1,500 bodies in the same space that you only had 100 bodies in. Now make that into nightlife venues, clubs where there isn't a lot of seating with a DJ and dancing, and all of a sudden your occupancy can grow, and then if you multiply that, now you've got 3,000 people. Now you talk about Charleston, and Charleston is a vibrant area, and King Street is really a dense nightlife district. But the police chief was being overwhelmed in trying to manage the crowds. So we worked with him, and he worked locally, and they began to realize each block has only a certain capacity of people that can be reasonably accommodated on the sidewalks. Why does Bourbon Street close down? Why does 6th Street in Austin close down? Because there was too many venues in the space for the sidewalks to accommodate them, so they started to walk in the street. So then that became perceived as a pedestrian safety challenge, so the police said, well, let's just close the street. Well, when you close the street, what you do is you make the street a party. And for people who are not old enough or don't have enough money to get into the clubs, they now have a space to come and drink in their cars and hang out on the street and be part of a vibrant party scene, which is what happened on Bourbon Street. There are a lot of people in New Orleans that don't like Bourbon Street, mostly because it doesn't give you the impression of what New Orleans really is about. And so I think you have to begin to think about what we call social occupancy. So the chief in Charleston was able to get a rate ordinance passed. It's just a practical guide that says for every new development on the street or on the side streets, for every block, the combined total number of seats for social venues, regardless of whether it's a restaurant, a coffee shop, a nightclub, whatever it is 1,000. Once you hit 1,000 seats in a block, you have to use a different use. It has to be a retail store, it has to be something else. So what's been the consequence of that? Well, now you have a different daytime retail starting to move into an area that was mostly nighttime. So you begin to see how this kind of guideline, this kind of form, structure can help to create a day, evening, and late night use rather than just a night use. Now, you could have nightclubs that are open Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock, and they're closed the rest of the week. And if they have a big storefront and they're next to each other, now your retail district has what we call a dead zone. It's like the gaping teeth of your district because it's nothing. Go to 6th Street during the day in Austin, and it's all closed, right? And it's right outside of the big Hilton Convention Hotel where people are spending $300 a night. They walk out on 6th Street that they've heard about, and there's nothing going on. So we look at what we call the 6 core elements. So you want to plan for people, enhance vibrancy, and assure safety. We break it up into quality of life and transportation, entertainment and multi-use sidewalks, public safety, and venue safety. So we look at a hospitality zone rather than an entertainment district because you want to convey this notion that this is a day, evening, and night activity, and it's really about hospitality and not just about entertainment. And so when we look at entertainment, we think of it in a broader context. It's it's dining, it's the social venues, it's the performance venue, it's events. And it matches the needs of young people, older people, people of different income levels, and that you have to really nurture your talent. You want to be a foodie city? Bring a culinary school. You want to be a music city? Work on subsidized housing and insurance for your musicians, which is what Seattle does and Austin does. You know, you want to be a Renaissance cocktail city? Open up a mixology school. So you have to develop and retain the talent. So these are all things that are part of becoming an entertainment destination. And then we talk about the multi-use sidewalk. You know, most of the streetscapes that I saw didn't have street performers or food vendors or food trucks. But that's really what adds vibrancy. Think about the cities you've been to. What is it about New Orleans? There's corners, there's street performers everywhere. You come to Santa Cruz, where I live, and there's street performers from 10 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. And we have people, because they're limited to 1 hour at one location before they have to move, you have people bringing pianos and drums and playing on the sidewalk. So that adds that vibrancy. So it's how do you integrate all of that into your city? And then public safety really is about preventing crime and then managing closing time if you have it, which is one of the worst public policies that we have. We basically have said, let's evolve our downtowns. Let's allow more restaurants and bars to open. Let's convert a bookstore that had 10 customers to a nightclub with 300 customers. Let's have that all happen because it's make our city fun and exciting and vibrant. And everybody's going out. They're all kind of testosterone charged up by the end of the night with alcohol fueling their desires. And then 2 o'clock in the morning, we have to turn on the lights for everybody, push them out on the street. And because you have such large crowds, the police think this is a crowd management issue, so they line up a battalion of police officers who march down the street to disperse these young adults who are doing nothing but trying to get the phone number of the person that they want to meet. You know, and how does that create a safer city? Plus, the police are all on the street where all the people are. People prevent crime. But what do? They push people out into the side streets, which is where all of the predators come. Because they know there's going to be a whole bunch of young, intoxicated people with $500 cell phones walking on the side streets in high-heel shoes, looking at their phone, and all of a sudden you just snatch that phone away from that person and they've been robbed. So your police have to be redeployed, not in moving people out, but rather dispersing the police into the side streets where the predatory behavior is occurring. I don't want to paint all of this as negative, but this is what we deal with all the time. And then venue safety is, what do the venues do? You know, we work like in Pittsburgh and Minneapolis. Clubs can hire police officers overtime and pay them cash for standing outside of their club in a uniform. Any kind of potential conflict with that system? You know, who does the police officer work for? Now you get 20 clubs and they each have to hire 2 officers. You got 40 police officers standing on the street in uniform. They perceive that they're working for the club, and you got people doing all kinds of stuff in front of them, and they don't do anything. So how does that generate a safer district? Because it's creating a sense of disorder that's tolerated by police officers in uniform. So you have to begin to get the venues to assume more responsibility, not only for the interior of their venue, but at closing time to be out there to help disperse their patrons and help them to get home safely. So these are the types of strategies that you begin to work with. Now, noise is really, I would say, the biggest problem in nightlife districts, beyond people getting shot. And I think in some cases, residents are more concerned about noise than they are about people getting shot, unless it's them or somebody they know. You know, so the sound issue is a development issue in mixed use that isn't addressed by code. I went to the International Code Council and said, what standards exist for soundproofing a residential development that faces an entertainment venue or district. And there are no sound standards for street-facing development. There are sound standards between walls if you're going to build a hotel or an apartment, but there are no sound standards between the street and the ground and the clubs. So that's where you get the biggest conflict, is you have a vibrant, evolving district, like the meatpacking district. A developer says, hey, this would be a great place to build a condo complex. They build a condo complex because it faces the sunset. They build the bedroom right by the sunset. So now you've got the bedroom facing the street, which is where all the sound comes from. And then people complain about the sound, and now all of a sudden you're trying to stifle the vibrancy that created the destination for people who want to live there. So San Francisco has taken an innovative approach. So they have an entertainment commission that before you have any form of entertainment, you have to come with a business plan that says how you're going to manage your security, how you're going to manage sound, how you're going to manage your alcohol service, have you met with all your neighbors, do they know what your business plan is, and that's what we're going to use to determine whether or not you get a permit and if you keep that permit. So that was their system to at least put some onus on the venues. But some developer builds a condo next door, and all of a sudden it's the responsibility of the venue. So a supervisor just recently passed a new ordinance that says any residential development that faces an existing nightlife district or venue has to appear before the Entertainment Commission to say how they're going to soundproof their venue. Their property. Now, Austin tried to do something like that, but it didn't get passed because the developers resisted it. There's a Westin hotel that's been built right opposite a venue that's already authorized to have an outdoor venue for music, and they can't rent hotel rooms on that side of the hotel. So they're having to go back and retrofit all of those hotels. They had to do it in DC with a Marriott Courtyard. In DC, you had two venues at closing time that emptied 2,500 people out onto the street. They built a Courtyard Marriott right across the street from them. And what happened? They lost tens of thousands of dollars of giving people money back because of the sound. So you have to begin to think from your, I don't know how it would fit into your form design, but think about some of these things. Oh, public urination. That is really, other than noise, peeing in alleyways and storefronts and parking garages, we, again, think about this. We say, okay, let's get a whole bunch of people, like in Southside, 10,000 people drinking beer with no requirements for how many restrooms they need. And then we tell them they all have to leave at the same time. And you got a bunch of guys who've been drinking beer all night out on the street trying to wait for a ride home, and what do? We don't think about this. So there's creative ways. Vancouver, Edmonton, in London and Amsterdam, it's appropriate for men, but they're usually the most vulgar anyhow. But the pop-ups for men, that you could have four guys all peeing at the same time, and then it goes down into the street at night, during the daytime. So that's another one of those areas. So. And then I brought up the issue of nighttime transportation. Huh? Yeah, they accommodate men.
Yeah.
Well, what they did in Edmonton is they brought those in, right? And then they measured uses. So actually, if you have portable urinals, you can measure use. So they found out that it was used 500 to 800 times a night. So they decided, well, we need to bring in a little bit more permanent, but women weren't able to use it. So then they created a little area for the porta potties for the women, but then that became a safety issue. Porta potties by themselves are not good additions to nightlife districts because they could also be where you have sex and drug trafficking that happens in the porta potties. So there are specially designed public facilities that have glass fronts, and then you really can't see anything except under the stalls. And then if you see more than 2 feet under the stall, then there's something going on there, and so that would be a solution for that. So transportation I brought up yesterday, which is is really important as well. And these are some of the things. And I just want to bring up Uber. Uber and Lyft, while they seem to be a godsend to nightlife districts, bring their own set of challenges if you have a common closing time because of the traffic impairment that they create. So Charleston, the chief, there's a code that prevents nobody from stopping on King Street after a certain hour. They have several designated taxi stands, and taxis will be cited if they drop off or pick up anybody other than in those stands. And Uber and Lyft have designated side streets where they have to drop off and pick up their customers. So there are ways to strategically integrate these groups and systems into your nighttime. So I just really want to ask you a couple of questions. And how do you see demographics and lifestyle trends impacting your nighttime economy? What is your current strategy to enhance the development of the nighttime economy? Another kind of trend that's coming out of Europe, and it started in Amsterdam, is what they call a night mayor. So this is like in Pittsburgh, the nighttime economy manager, in San Francisco. So this idea of a dedicated person who is a liaison to not only all of the city and regulatory agencies, but all of the business community and the residential groups as a problem solver is I think going to catch on over the next few years. And you have to really develop, and one of the biggest challenges is having more police. Here in New Orleans, the mayor decided a way to trim the budget for some other civic endeavors was to cut police. So now the French Quarter really has very few police. So because of that short-sightedness, you have a lot of safety problems. There's really a kind of a growing problem of sex workers, dancers being abducted and cut up, and it's kind of a bizarre kind of crime spree that's happening here. But the hotels, because they've been so concerned about nighttime safety and how it might impact their hotel stays, have pulled together $1 million to hire state police to come here. They put them up in hotels so that at least they have some police presence that the city's not willing to provide. But do you think the nighttime economy in the French Quarter is generating any kind of revenue to the city that could be supported? But no, it's not. And what happens is it deteriorates to where you lose the value. So you have to go back to your elected officials and recognize the value. And then what are the options for singles, jingles, families, and jingles, and how, if you've ever thought about it, would you like your nightlife to evolve? What are the barriers? And is there a challenge in policy, practices, policing, and planning? So that's my name and my address. And remember, you have to build the foundation first, which is what we call these 6 core elements. So I'm going to end with a little story about this woman who was running away from a tiger. And she jumps over a cliff and grabs onto this vine. So she's holding onto this vine, and she looks up, and there's the tiger. And then she looks down, and there's 2 other tigers. So she's like, well, I'll just wait it out. So then a black rat and a white rat come, and they start gnawing away. So she pushes them away, right? And they keep coming back. So now she's realizing eventually they're going to eat through that vine. But she sees this big, bright red strawberry. So she reaches out and she grabs it and she eats it. So the moral of the story is the tiger at the top is your past, so you can never go back. The tigers at the bottom are your future, so eventually you're going to die. The vine is your life, and the black rat and the white rat are the night and the day who every passing 24 hours is eating a little bit of your life vine away. So what you need to do is to always look for the strawberry and grab it and savor it, because that's what life is all about, is the strawberry. Anybody have any questions?
Staggered closing hour.
Well, the staggered closing hour started, that term that we picked it up as in Los Angeles, where on Hollywood they had this big closing time crowd. We communicated, he had a question about staggered closing hours, right? So we worked in the city of San Jose. San Jose was the kind of city, you know, San Jose is the center of Silicon Valley, but they had like 10,000 occupancy in their downtown district. If I were you, I'd go back and look at every social venue you have, get their seating capacity, and add all of that up for how many seats would be filled if everybody was there at the same time, and that'll give you a number of people. But they figured 10,000 people, and that's when they had the battalion of police, and the businesses didn't like it because it really was negative publicity. So we worked with the city of San Jose and they came up with the term soft closing instead of staggered closing. Staggered closing implies some other kind of outcome. Soft closing is what we came up with. And you allow businesses to stay open an extra hour without alcohol service. But there were also requirements if they participated that like 15 minutes before they had to lower the volume of their music and start to raise the lights, you know. And then they couldn't have any alcohol available after 2. They could serve food, they could serve soft drinks. So that began, it was a pilot program, and it helped to diffuse the people. But one of the outcomes was the cabs, if you put everybody all out at the same time, nobody ever has enough cabs in the city. Maybe with Uber it's going to be different. But so the cabs would come, take people, and somebody who might be drunk and think I should take a cab home, now all of a sudden there are no cabs. So they'll make the decision to drive instead of wait. But by having that closing time, you end up having opportunities for taxis to come in a couple of times. The challenge is getting businesses to do it because their main argument is I'm not making any money, so it's going to cost me money. And that's the challenge they're having in Charleston because they're trying to do it. In Providence, where they did it, they actually had to go back to the state and get the state law changed because the state law required that everybody had to be out at 2. So they had to go back and legislate a change so they allowed businesses to have people on the premise for 45 minutes more. And the way that they actually made it work was the public safety director got all the bars together and said, look, I review your license every year. This is a good thing. So I think it would be a good idea if you participate. So it's your choice, but, and so it actually has helped. And it made a much more comfortable experience for the patrons. You know, businesses that serve food are actually generating revenue. My reaction to anybody who says, why should I pay for staff an hour when I'm not selling anything? My response is, well, you know, if you're a nightclub, you know, you have staff at 9 o'clock, even though your customers don't come until 11. You're not making money between 9 and 11, but you have them there just so that they're ready and can help when the people come. The same thing is at the end of the night. You want to create that total experience of service and not that service in the beginning. Does that make sense?
Okay, we got a question back here, but I had forgot to remind everybody that if you're interested in learning more about retail, Bob Gibbs puts on a seminar at Harvard in the summers. It's a multi-day event where you can dive deep into everything. So if you want to know about that, just contact Bob. He'll give you all the details.
Hey, Jim, a lot of us here from Lafayette, and this all was pretty complex. So we have this simple solution that we just put a moratorium and no more bars. So what do you think of that?
Well, you know, Manioc in Philadelphia did it. Morgantown in DC did it. Normally, moratoriums are put into effect because there isn't any strategic plan for their district. And so then you start to get all of the issues, the overcrowded sidewalks, you know, the lack of availability of parking, people parking in residential areas. So then you say, okay, we have to stop this. Let's put a moratorium. And so all you're doing is increasing the value of the problem businesses that you're trying to fix, and you're not creating an opportunity for other businesses to come in who might bring a different business plan. So I think it really cements in, because somebody might come in and say, hey, I want to open an art gallery with some jazz music and some fine dining, and they want to serve wine and have some cocktails. Sorry, you can't, there's a moratorium, you know. So that's what happens, is you basically cement in the bad operators and you prevent any kind of transition to new operators. So I think that that's one of the challenges. Let me just add one thing. I've been corresponding with folks in Sydney, Australia. So in Australia and New Zealand, they came up with another strategy. They call it a lockout. So what it is that you can stay open until 3 o'clock in the morning in Sydney if you serve alcohol. But if somebody comes into your establishment, they have to be there at 1, and they can't go anywhere else, and nobody else can come in. So essentially what they're saying is your patrons who are just young, they're mobile, they're checking their Facebook, and oh, Charlie's at this venue. Oh, it's 1:10. I can't go meet Charlie, I have to stay here, and Charlie can't come and meet me. It's devastated the nightlife, but it's also reduced some of the assaults, the problems that they have over there. So everybody looks at it as a success. Well, in reality, they reduced the number of patrons by about 30%. So naturally, if you reduce the number of people, you're going to reduce the number of conflicts. You can't put lots of people together. And the thing is that a lot of times they'll look at fights in a nightlife district. Not that you really, don't want to have fights. But you get young men who are intoxicated with young women trying to compete. You're going to have conflict. It's just, I'm sorry, it's a natural phenomenon. What you want to do is minimize the conflict and the risk. And so the idea is how do you create an environment where that kind of aggressive behavior isn't happening? So there's a woman out of Canada that we work with, Kate Graham, who studied violence, male-to-male violence in and around nightclubs. One of the key factors in controlling aggressive behavior in nightlife venues is to maintain crowd control. The more you let a venue get too crowded, the more you're going to have people bumping into each other, or some guy bumps into his girlfriend's breast and he's like, "What are you doing? You're hitting on my woman." And they have words and everything. They might not fight in the venue because they don't want to get thrown out. But when they get out on the street, it's like, "Hey, you screwing with my girlfriend," and now all of a sudden you got to fight. And more police doesn't solve aggressive behavior. I was with a sergeant in Fort Myers, and he said, men will fight as a display. Peacocks do it, roosters do it, men do it too. It's a way to show off or whatever. It's a macho thing. So the police sergeant said, look, the more police we have, we end up having more fights. Because men will get into a fight, not necessarily because they want to really hurt the other guy. They just want to show how they are for their girlfriend, right? And so if they know the police are there, they know they're never going to get into a really serious fight. So these are the types of things you have to begin to... you're laughing about it, but I saw that in a club. And the funny thing too is they had a hip-hop club and they had a kind of a regular everyday club. And they were all really focused about the fights around the hip-hop club. But I witnessed a fight between 2 white guys, and it was so classic, because they were like in the club, and they're bumping, and then one guy starts hitting the other guy, and they go out, and the security guard people come, and they get them, and they go out onto the sidewalk. So you got the one group, and this guy has like a little cut, and his girlfriend's like rubbing his cut with a napkin. Oh, And so it was just such a classic example of what happens in nightlife districts. Now we're also focusing in on male to female aggressive sexual assaults in and around nightclubs are really increasingly of concern. And what's happening in college cities is that you have colleges not building dormitories. So you have businesses who are coming in and building student housing in your downtown districts. I was just in Columbia, Missouri. They just added 3,000 beds for students within walking distance of their downtown. So not only can students preload or pre-game before they go out to the clubs, it's easier if they're kind of meeting somebody to say, "Hey, come on, go to my apartment," and they have to walk. And so therefore you have this scenario that can put women at risk in a way that they might not have been if they had to arrange to get in the car, in a cab, and go someplace else. So you have this increasing amount of sexual assaults that are happening in these downtown apartment complexes that are really difficult for police to respond to and analyze. And so that's really a big issue with nightlife. But there is a study being done to identify the behavior patterns of males in venues who are aggressive. So they've been doing a training in New York City for security people. So that after the training, there was a guy who came up and bought 2 drinks and went to a table. But before he went to the table with this woman, the bartender saw him breaking up a pill and putting it in the drink. So then the bartender went and brought 2 new drinks and said, oh, I made a mistake. I have to give you these drinks. So she took the drinks, kept them behind the bar, and called the police. They were able to analyze that he actually was putting a drug into this woman's drink. So that kind of training, that kind of awareness is really a kind of an evolving pattern in nightlife districts that you don't normally think about.
Jim, can you talk about patron education? Let's say things they're doing in Edmonton to actually reduce problems by letting patrons know what good behavior is.
Well, along the same lines of violence and sexual assault. So Edmonton is one of the cities that's probably the most progressive in social marketing, but that I've worked with. And so Edmonton is where all the oil was. You know that's why we had that Keystone Pipeline thing. It's because Alberta is where the oil comes from, and there was a ton of money. So you could be you don't even have a high school degree. You could go work in the oil fields, make $100,000 a year. They give you housing, and then you got a week off, and you go to Edmonton, which is a college, which has a lot of young women, and now all of a sudden you've got this mix of young men, who have been isolated in these camps with $100,000 in their pockets to spend. There's a lot of violent and aggressive behavior around women. So they created a campaign called Be a Lover, Not a Fighter. And it was aimed at the man. And so they had these pictures of like a rub down or knock down. So they had a picture of a man getting a back rub or 2 guys fighting, and they had a little kit that had a condom and a Band-Aid. So, and it said, which would you rather use tonight? And so it's very much oriented to the male. Now, they also did a campaign called The Night Going Right. And it was aimed at the female going out so that she would check with her friends. And there's actually a great video that came out of Europe where a woman preparing to go out at night is like, she checks her bag. Okay, I got mace, I got my cell phone, I got a whistle. And then she goes to her roommate and says, look at what I'm wearing. Take a picture of me in case something happens, so that if you need to know what I was wearing, you'll have a picture of it. And then text me every hour. If I don't respond, then you know that something's wrong. So this is a woman preparing to go out. Now a man, they have in the same picture, he checks his pulse, got his keys, he checks his wallet, and he says bye to his roommate, and he walks out the door. So this is the type of thing that is being challenged, and I think men don't understand the issues from a woman's perspective. I've done a lot of other things. I've been a suicide prevention counselor. I counsel men who were involved in domestic violence. And one of the things I learned is that, then you should think about, as I look around the room with all your new urban planners, it's mostly men. And because most architects and planners of downtowns are men, just like most nightclubs are run by men. And they all want women to come. So I think you have to put things into the perspective of a woman. But getting back to your question, the other thing they tried to do was to educate women about how to prepare to go out. But there was a big backlash that this is blaming the victim. And so they reorganized their campaign to be saying, don't be that guy. So it's really more of an education of the people who are with a man who's being aggressive, and to intervene if some man is harassing a woman, so that you begin to create a new culture among men that type of aggressive sexual behavior is not appropriate in a nighttime setting. So those are the types of social media and marketing. But you have to be that sexual assault issue is a very delicate issue, and we had that at our conference in Charleston. We had a session from the New York people. You have the Rape Crisis Center, you have the hospital that treats rape victims, we have the DA's Office of Sex Crimes, where they have to prosecute sex offenders, and we have the Nightlife Association. So that's kind of a growing movement too. Orlando, the nightclubs have put together a poster campaign, but our team really criticized that campaign because it still is positioned, one, it's in the hallways, and it's aimed at the women, and it's victim blaming. And so if you want to put messaging about this, and you want to put it more in the men's room or in the women's room, you want to be more specific to where you're targeted. But I think those types of social marketing messages really have to become more integrated into a nighttime plan.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Hey, Jim. Last year, a group of us from Lafayette went to Chicago to attend your nightlife conference. And the first question you asked was if your downtown nightlife was at a tipping point. And we, after the 3-day conference, we realized we were. And to a certain extent, we still are when it comes to the nightlife. And a combination of factors from bad operators to bad policies implemented over the years. We went from an average of 9,000 patrons downtown to about 2,000, from early 2000s to now. Day businesses not happy how nightlife is executed. Nightlife businesses not happy in the progress. And we are aware of all the issues we have, and we've been creating awareness. And now we're trying to decide which areas we're going to tackle first. So would you be able to give us an idea from the standpoint of working on the conditioning license, towards the path of getting rid of the moratorium, the ambassador program, which is connecting the dots between operators, improving lighting, improving security, what would be the top steps if we find ourselves in this position?
Well, I think first of all, you're going to need to have some method by which to address some of the problematic behaviors of the venue. So that may include just collecting some data, and documenting incidents, whether it be calls for service, or whether it be where people are arrested, where they're coming from, if they're arrested for a DUI. So now all of a sudden you have some data. So now you can say, okay, out of 100 venues, 60% of them are never called or never have a problem, and 40 of them do, and of those, only 10 of them are called most frequently. So now what you want to do is put together what is referred to as a public safety compliance team. So you can't police these issues. You have to have fire, you have to have health, you have to have alcohol regulatory, you have to have your building inspector. And so these agencies have to work together to share information. So what we find is that a business that starts to have a lot of health code violations, that's an early sign of poor management. Because if you can't manage your sanitation procedures, you're not managing your staff, you're not managing your business. Now, the second thing is you want to look and see, are they paying cash for their beer? Once somebody goes to a cash basis instead of a credit basis, they're having cash flow problems. So you want to look for indicators of a business getting into trouble. It's not that you want to close them down, it's you want to let them know that you're aware of these issues. Every other business has never been cited in a DUI arrest over the past 3 months. You've been cited 10 times. And the people who are being cited have BACs of 0.15 and greater. So there must be something happening in the way you're running your business. Let's meet and talk about what you're going to do to fix it. So that's a kind of an early assistance intervention. And then if they fail to respond, you have to bring all of the forces in. There's no business who couldn't be closed down if every inspector came in and did a thorough inspection. But you don't want to do that on a regular basis. You want to do that as kind of your last resort. But more importantly, you want to get your good businesses to come together and be part of a team with your regulatory and policing agencies, because you want to get them to understand that the value of their business is being hindered by the operations of these other businesses. So the more you could get a peer-to-peer dialogue going with some of these businesses, or you really, it's the kind of the weakest link in anything. The strongest will always protect the weakest. And so if you just randomly start to pressure one business, maybe all the other businesses, because they feel you're being unfair, will rally around that person instead of siding with you. So you first have to segregate all the really responsible businesses, get them to agree on their own set of best practices, work with the city and all the different agencies to support that, have some kind of an announcement that they all agree to this, and now all of a sudden you're painting some of these more rogue businesses as outsiders instead of the main part. So I think it's getting responsible businesses to set their own standards, getting your interagency team working together more, doing some educational outreach to the businesses, and then having some data to substantiate why you need to intervene with those businesses. But then you need a longer term plan. If you want to end the moratorium, How are you going to redesign your licensing and business permitting system? And so, you know, a lot of the arcane rules that we have, like food to beverage sale ratio or distance requirements, those are no longer applicable to an urban environment. What the city of Springfield, Missouri did is they said, we're not gonna look at that. You come to us with your business plan. You say you wanna be a restaurant, you're only gonna be open till 11. This is how you're gonna manage your trash, this is how you're gonna manage your alcohol service. This is your business plan, we approve this business plan. Now, if all of a sudden you start opening later, or you start selling a lot, you start promoting alcohol instead of your fine dining, we'll call you in and say, this is the plan that you said you were gonna do. Now, you wanna stay open later? That's fine. Just come to us with how you're going to extend your hours, what kind of security you're gonna have, how you're gonna prevent underage access, you know, what are you gonna do at closing time to disperse crowds? You're gonna have entertainment, how you're gonna manage sound. We need a sound engineer's report that says you have a sound system that's controlled, so it's not gonna disturb the neighbors. So you can operate later, but you have to show us how you're gonna operate. And if you're not complying with your own plan, then we're gonna call you in and say, you're not complying with your plan. So it's not that you have 55% alcohol and 45% food, because nobody can measure that. Besides, a martini today can cost as much as an entree in some restaurants. So all of these formulas are no longer applicable. What you want to know is, give us your plan and we'll judge you by that plan.
We have one quick final question here, and then we're gonna wrap up.
We could talk about this after too, but one thing you brought up was the noise ordinance. And what that does to these neighborhoods. It started on live music and entertainment, and you get these neighbors that move in, and usually the person who spends the most money is the first to complain. What does that do to building regulations moving forward for urban infill? And what does that do to the price point for real estate? Because it's more expensive to build it to be that good to make it quiet.
Well, I think you have to decide in advance what you want in your district. And do you want to have live entertainment? Is this an area? Or do you want to have an area that you're going to say, only in this area are we going to have late night, you know, amplified music after hours or whatever? You know, do you want to build a residential development? I mean, right next to an existing nightclub that's been there for 20 years, and then all of a sudden have residents move in and complain about it? You're going to go and close this business down?
Well, that's ongoing. That's something we struggle with in New Orleans. You don't have.
Yeah, I was involved in that, 8 years ago, and the whole idea is how do you enforce the sound ordinance? But the problem on Bourbon Street is that you had some prosecutor or mayor or somebody who decided all the businesses have to keep their doors open. And once that happened, that led to competition based upon drawing people in. And then you had the loosening of food to beverage sale ratio, so now you have daiquiri bars that sell pizza. You know, so you don't have a bar license in New Orleans, you have a restaurant license, and so you open up a pizza and have a daiquiri bar, you know? And so there's a lot of bad policies that were implemented in New Orleans that led to where you are today. Now, how do you go back and put the genie back in the bottle? So there was efforts to try to update the sound ordinance, and that may not necessarily be the only solution that you need to work
Maybe
with.
it's the building ordinance.
Pardon?
You know, maybe it's the building ordinance. These rehabs, these historical rehabs.
Yeah, but you know, that gets into the question that Andre was saying, you know, do you want to have businesses that are existing now have to upgrade to the current code?